Hello and welcome to Writing Women, the show where I will talk about the women who exist in fiction and the people who created them. This week is Book 3 of Tamora Pierce's Protector of the Small Quartet, Squire. First things first, hello all 5 of you who subscribed to me this week. I got onto my Tumblr after not logging on for like a week, and I saw that Tamora Pierce's blog actually reblogged one of my videos. So my subscribers jumped up a little bit as the reach broadened, and when I saw it, I was so excited that I was literally shaking. I'm happy you all found my channel. For anyone who might be new, I'm sorry if you can hear a little bit of noise in the background. I try to do what I can to remove it out in post, but I have a dog who doesn't like to leave my room when I'm in here, and he's a little hot boy, so he's either panting or moving around and shuffling around in the background. I gave him a bone to chew on, and he's sitting across the room today, but I don't know how long he's going to be over there. I usually try to pause when he comes near me and pants near my mic, but, can't get rid of it all. On to today's story. This book made me cry multiple times. I'll get more into it later, but suffice to say I've been on a roller coaster of emotion this week trying to read it again. We are also reaching the shift in these books where they start to grow a lot longer, so it took me a bit longer than normal to finish this. I mentioned the publishing issues early on in my Alana episodes, where this type of story was difficult to publish in the pre-Harry Potter timeframe. The influence of Harry Potter, love it or hate it, is impossible to ignore in both story structure for other YA books and how long they are allowed to be now. On to the very long story recap, and then to my thoughts on it. It has been 6 weeks since the events at the end of the last book. The Great Congress is ending, and Kel hasn't been approached by any knights. She visits the Chapel of the Ordeal, and while touching the door of the Ordeal chamber, she has a vision of herself as a squire to a desk knight in the palace. It is her current greatest fear. She stops by to see Neil before heading to the practice courts to work with her lance. After hitting the wooden hoop target, she sees Raoul of Goldenlake watching her. He tells her that she's doing well and then asks her to be his squire. He explains that once the Yamani princess arrives, the court is going on grand progress, and Kel will be invaluable to him because she can speak Yamani and knows their ways. He warns her that she will be on the road a lot and work harder than the other squires because of his position as the commander of the King's Own. Kel is elated and accepts. He brings her to the Own stable and gives her a new horse. Members of the Own need 2 horses, one for long-distance riding and one for battle. She names the new horse Hoshi, Yamani for star, and returns to her room to pack. Neil comes in and tells her that he's been made an offer by Lady Alana. His father and the king support it because she is a healer and can teach him to be a knight while also helping him learn to heal. He is sick over the thought that Kel will hate him for it, knowing that it was her lifelong dream to serve as the lioness's squire. Kel is upset, thinking that dreams die hard, especially ones you've held your whole life, but knows that Neil will be a good fit with Alana. She gives him her own news, and he is excited for her. Raoul is the most respected knight in the realm, and as his squire, nobody can question her worth or if she used trickery to gain her shield. Lalassa arrives, and Kel gives her the news as well. The maid's excited and cries in happiness. She sends them off to lunch, and when Kel returns to her room, she finds that Lalassa has already begun working on her new uniforms. She tells Kel that she is not bringing her clothes to anybody but her for work, and that she won't accept payment for it, even though she's just signed a lease for her own shop. Kel brings all the sparrows to her room and tells them the news. She explains that they will still be fed, but that all of them don't need to come with her. The sparrow Peg decides to stay with Lalassa, and 12 of the flock decide to stay with Kel. While entering her new quarters, Kel overhears a conversation between Raoul and one of his captains, Flindon Whiteford. Flynn is complaining about how the court gossips will be talking about him and Kel, and Raoul insists that it's not a big deal because they've always talked about him and his lack of finding a wife anyway. After hearing this, Kel pretends to come into the room again, but loudly this time. Kasim, a Bazir member of the Own, pops his head through the door to Raoul's quarters and invites her in. The 3 men talk with her about preparing her gear. She shows them her glaive and demonstrates her proficiency with it. Raoul approves her use of the weapon and has Kasim take her to be outfitted with everything she does not already possess. He compliments her existing gear, and she elects not to tell him about her benefactor. She's happy to realize that for the first time, a full-fledged warrior tested her knowledge of weapons and didn't second-guess her. That night, she's woken up by a pounding on her door. The Own is leaving to deal with a village that was attacked in the royal forest. Lalassa helps her get dressed, and she runs to the stables. She preps her mounts, and after tying them with the others, she eavesdrops on a conversation between members of the Own complaining about her being the girl, and green to boot. She meets a new friend, Neil's cousin Domiton. He gives her food and tells her that she will learn to eat before they ride. Raoul comes out and briefs everyone, and then they ride out. When stopping for a rest, Kel takes her Knightmaster's horse to drink with her own mounts. The Own standard-bearer, Larent of Eldorn, nephew of Delia the traitor, accosts her. He hates Kel because she now has the duties he had previously performed for Raoul. Kasim explains that no warrior job would accept Larent because of his aunt's treachery, except Raoul, who gave him a place to belong. He tells her Larent isn't a bad guy and just has a temper. Kel understands what it's like to not be wanted anywhere, so she tries to understand. They arrive at the village of Haresfield, and it is largely destroyed. After surveying the village, Raoul asks Kel her opinion. She gives him a pretty good analysis of the numbers, including an estimation of the distinction between centaur and horse hooves, and her master is impressed. Kel intuits that they set fires after the robbing was done to settle old scores. She thinks how she doesn't understand people who like romantic songs of highwaymen and pirates, because anybody who would steal what little people had don't deserve songs about them. She thinks that the centaurs aren't any better. They do this after having been welcomed to stay in Tortal so long as they obey the realm's laws. They must hunt these raiders down because they will likely strike again. The local centaur leader, Greystreak, tries to offer to buy Kel for breeding using slaves as currency. At first, Kel thinks he refers to human slaves, but realizes that he means horses. As he tries to leave, he's stopped by Peach Blossom and Raoul's horse, who have pulled up from the picketing line. Peach Blossom snaps at him and he scrambles out of the way, nearly falling. More horses come and stop him from leaving, giving Raoul the chance to remind him that he is required by their treaty to send men to help search for the raiders. While eating, Raoul explains to Kel why he called in rider groups to assist. The Own ride big horses and make a lot of noise, while the riders' small ponies can quickly cover ground in the forest and flank their enemies while they are distracted by the obvious pursuit from the Own. Flynn implies that Kel isn't going to have the stomach for the work they do and leaves. After eating, Kel assists a family in putting their house back in order and is fetched by Larent. He directs her to a few packs that he claims have the wine service for Raoul's meeting with the centaurs, and turns out he lied and had sent her to rummage in Flynn's packs instead. She won't name who misdirected her, though, and serves the meeting with water, which is Raoul's actual preference as he does not drink. Burry, now the commander of the riders, has come. The meeting runs late, and they return to the inn to sleep. Larent shows up and demands to know why Kel didn't name him. She just says she doesn't tattle on people and goes to bed. One of the helping centaurs explains to Kel that she had tried to get Greystreak to cull these renegades before. She further explains that culling is killing the bad blood in the herd, and that the leader is likely culling the horses that were bred with the renegades. Kel is sickened by this. A few days later, they find McCorn, the man who had opened the gate for the raiders in Haresfield. He explains that he'd tried to run away when he realized it wasn't a glorious life like he had thought. He begs the king's mercy if he tells them where the raiders are going. McCorm explains that they are heading for a place called Owl's Hollow. They devise their plan of attack, and Kel is to go with Flynn. She is upset by this, but doesn't question the order. Raoul tells her that is fine if she will be a line knight, but that she should know why certain orders are given if she is to be in command. He wants her to show Flynn that she will do what is needful for anyone, not just her knightmaster. She understands his reasoning, but she's still a little salty about it. Kel is posted on a disused game track for the battle. She sets a trap in the event someone flees this way. Just her luck, an escaping centaur with a child strapped to its back and a creature trapped in a saddlebag comes that way. They fight after Kel frees the child and Kel slays him, earning herself a lot of injuries in the process. Jump brings the child to her, and she opens the pack to find a baby griffin inside. Adult griffins will kill any human they smell their child's scent on, so Kel knows they must find its parents and explain that she rescued it from poachers, or she will die. Kel wakes in the field hospital. Battle is done and the remaining bandits are captured. The griffin is caged next to her. It has been tossing fish scraps through the bars while she slept, and she figures out that it wants her to feed it by hand. She gets a few bites and scratches for the pleasure, but manages to feed it properly. The shepherd boy who had shown her the game track comes in to tell her the family of the child she saved wants to thank her. She says she was just following orders, and he leaves. Raoul comes in and compliments the trap she had laid, telling her not to think about the ifs when she points out that she could have killed the child by accident when the centaur fell. He tells her that the Own can protect her while they find the griffin's parents. Kel has a nightmare of Joran and his friends and wakes to find the griffin biting her ear. Its magic dissolved the cave, so she wraps it in sheets. She feeds it, and it vomits and poops everywhere. The thing won't take food from a gloved hand, so she learns to minimize damage it can do to her. They take the bandits to Irontown to face justice. McCorm accepts 10 years in the army, and most of the others face hanging. The brother of the slain centaur explains his brother stole the baby griffin from a peddler offering griffin feathers for sale. Kel watches the hangings impassively, thinking that she had seen worse when the Emperor executed 40 guards at once. Oh, there's that savage other thing again. Burry tells Kel that they execute because the crown says they must, but she explains that she thinks it does more harm than good down the road, sowing anger in the families of the dead. That's a nice anti-capital punishment argument from Burry. Dane comes and inspects the griffin. She tells them that it is a boy and explains how to clean and exercise it and trim its claws. She can't take it since she's on the move and explains that it is fixated on Kel now. She leaves to go hunt for its parents and carry out the king's orders. Kel makes leather arm guards to protect herself a little bit from the creature, and they spend a few weeks sweeping the forest, taking out robbers and spydren nests. Kel meets all sort of immortals, even seeing some stormwings. Raoul and his men tell Kel about the Battle of Port Lagan from their personal experience, and she learns a lot from them. Fall begins and they return to the palace. Kel gets her official instruction as a squire now. She's shown around the barracks, and Raoul takes her to be fitted for real armor. He inspects her weapons, and she tells him of her benefactor. He takes her to the yard and teaches her to tilt against a real person. He unhorses her repeatedly and finally sends her to rest. He tells her that he knew she would learn quickly. She feels half dead and realizes that many of the Own and the Queen's riders were watching. They are all amazed that she's still standing after tilting against Raoul, and Larent tries to be dismissive of it. She goes to bathe after grooming Peach Blossom, and ladies in the bathhouse mistake her bruises for those given to her by a man beating her. They tell her that she doesn't have to let it go on and she can go to the temple of the goddess. She explains to them that she's a squire and how she got the bruises, and they finally let her leave. After dinner, Raoul begins teaching Kel to calculate sums for supplying an army. She asks him why it matters since she doesn't think people will ever want her as a leader. He explains that there are different types of warrior at their level, starting with lone warriors like Alana, then knights who patrol their borders, then soldiers who manage well when told what to do, and then commanders. He and many others think that she has the potential to be a commander given the right education. She easily calculates the problem he gave her, mathematics being something she's good at, and he calls her a show-off before sending her to bed. Kel settles into a sort of routine for a while. Her flying lessons with Raoul get more bearable. Eventually he brings in Sir Gerald and Garvey, his squire, to practice tilting with her. She and Garvey seem almost evenly matched, but on her third pass against Gerald, she tries one of the tricks she learned from Raoul and almost unseats him. The knight congratulates her, and she politely accepts the praise. Raoul is clearly proud of her. Her friends have returned with their knight masters, and she dines with them for the first time in a while. During dinner, a Yamani woman comes to find her. She's Yukimi, a childhood friend of Kel's. She invites Kel to visit the princess after dinner. Kel agrees to ask Raoul permission and returns to her friends. Cleon is acting strange, and Kel sees Neil notice it too. Kel jokes with Neil not to try writing poetry to Yuki because Yamani poetry is very different from Tortalan. Princess Shinkokami turns out to be a childhood friend of Kel's as well. They are happy to be reunited, and the princess invites Kel to practice the glaive with them at dawn. Kel accepts and has to introduce them to Jump, who has found her in their chamber. Kel rises at dawn as usual and feeds her griffin before heading to glaive practice. Kel discovers that one of the people at practice is her mother. The princess and her group are elated to have the Mindelans around again. Another of this morning's group is Queen Thayet, who Kel is finally introduced to properly. They start to regularly meet for practice, and Kel takes to showing the princess the palace and soothing her nerves about her reception by the country. She brings her to Lalassa to be fitted for Western clothes, and Lalassa takes to her as well. She even talks to her about Prince Roald and the upcoming marriage. Raoul takes them out for a while and wants to stay out of chorus for midwinter. The men try to sway him because they want to attend all of the parties. Dom jokes that he hopes Kel will introduce him to the Yamani women, and Kel reflects on how she now has a crush on Dom instead of his cousin Neil. A messenger arrived calling them to chorus. The person who paid people to kidnap Lalassa has been found, and they must return for the trial. Snow begins on the ride back, and the griffin is freezing, so Kel puts him inside her clothes to stay warm, warning him not to savage her. When they return, half frozen and wet, Lalassa and her friend Tion are waiting and get Kel and her Knightmaster settled before they bring up the trial. The person hasn't been named, but Paxton of Nond and the Steward of Stone Mountain are attending the trial, so they know it was Joran because Joran is Paxton's squire. Kel is furious and goes to be alone to think. Joran openly admits to his crime at trial. He's contemptuous and believes Wilden was forced to let Kel stay, despite Wilden saying otherwise. He's fined a large sum and allowed free. Kel is angry and openly challenges the magistrate, Duke Turamat. She points out that if he had hurt her, Joran would be in prison, but because Lalassa wasn't noble, he walks free after dropping some money in her lap. Lalassa and Raoul silence her, but she stops the king and queen and asks them for a private word. Privately, she tells them how she thinks the law where a servant's worth is measured in coin and not as people smacks of slavery. To her surprise, Thayet and John agree. They also explain to her the complicated nature of trying to change things, how priests can say the gods have turned from the monarchs, how nobles have the ability to start civil wars over things that they don't like. Kel begins to understand the complication they face, but she is adamant. After Raoul says that he supports Kel, John agrees to try and use Lalassa as an example to get that law changed. He asks in return that Kel swear to him that she will forego her noble right to challenge Joran if the crown does what it can to change things. John tells her that if she wants equality in the law, then she must agree to abide by the judgment of law instead of her price paid as a noble. She agrees and swears to him. Jump shows up and leads her to her room where the griffin has attacked the sparrows, injuring the one called Arrow. Kel traps him under her comforter and gets the sparrow. Jump forces the griffin into the area under Kel's desk, and Dane comes to heal the bird and use her magic to make the griffin averse to hunting the birds. Raoul comes and helps her repair her now torn comforter while talking to her about his past. He tells her stories of his time as a page and leaves on the note that John was probably trying to get her on his side that day, because there's a difference between serving the crown out of duty and because you believe in it. He tells her that he doesn't believe Joran will pass his ordeal of knighthood, and that if he were the training master, he wouldn't have let Joran get this far. During midwinter festivities, Kel is serving with the other squires. She notices that Raoul and Shinko are barely speaking and knows something must be done. Yuki comes to her saying the same thing. Shinko won't ask about battle business because her brother told her that the prince would want her to be a conventional wife. Cleon, who has been at his flirting with Kel again, and the prince's other friends, agree to help in a plan. They get the prince to join Raoul in a side room with Buri and talk about recent battles. By the end of the night, the prince and princess are debating the merits of different weapons with each other, and everyone is pleased, knowing that they will get along better now. On their way to their rooms, Cleon finally gets over his nerves and kisses Kel for midwinter luck. The remaining nights of the festivities follow much the same. Kel doesn't see Cleon again those nights, but Buri and Raoul have hit their stride and presided over more warfare discussions in the side rooms of the parties. Kel is happy to see the royal couple be growing closer over these nights. She receives more gifts from her benefactor and a magnificent pair of mail gloves from Raoul. After that year's squires finish their ordeals, she visits the chapel again alone. Touching the door, she has another vision. This time, the vision is of those people she knows and cares about being culled or bought as slaves by Joran and the executed centaurs. After a few months of adventuring, at one point Kel even meets George Cooper while fighting some pirates near his land, they return to Chorus to find it deserted. The royal progress has begun, and they rest 2 weeks before the king sends a messenger demanding Raoul attend him. They ride slowly to catch up, Raoul putting it off as long as possible. When they finally arrive, the king is annoyed and gets outright angry when Raoul demands to not be separated from his squire, knowing that nobody in the city will allow her in with the griffin in her care. So they get to stay in the camp instead of in a noble's house. Kel is to serve at the banquets and finally sees Cleon again. She feels odd about it, not really sure about her feelings. She sees her friend Owen too, now a squire but without a knightmaster due to the progress. So he's stuck serving the master of ceremonies. She serves during the event and not much happens. A tournament is happening the next day and Kel gets to be a normal squire tending her master's gear. He tells her that there are rumors some conservatives and nobles are saying they will have a go at him for encouraging her. They think the gods will withdraw their favor of him for taking in the girl. He points out that people always say the gods favor them when they win, and when they lose, it's always because the opponent cheated or didn't have good gear. Kel watches Raoul thump his opponents for 2 days. The first day, she is joined by her friends, and the second day alone. Laurent manages to groom Raoul's horse before she gets there, and she approves of this, knowing that it makes him feel good. She understands that he thinks they are competing for the Lord's attention, but she doesn't feel the same. After Raoul is settled one afternoon, Kel joins the Amani ladies, who ask her to play the game fan toss with them, using the deadly metal shukusen fans that they carry. They circle up and toss it around in a dangerous dance, interrupted finally by Neil. He steps in and catches the fan, not knowing that he almost hurt himself. Yuki demonstrates the fan's deadliness by slashing a tent pole and leaves. Kel tells Neil that she'll cool off soon and explains to him why the ladies were scared when he stepped in. After explaining the fan's purpose as a discreet weapon, she hears the queen say that she wants one and realizes that they'd had an audience for their game. That audience includes the lioness. Kel is speechless when she sees her, and the lioness nods to Kel and leaves. Fayette goes to ask the princess to have a fan made for her, and Kel and Neil leave together. She berates him for not telling her the lioness was there. Kel gets to help deliver letters to the heads of fiefs to let them know that they will be footing the bill for upcoming events. They are all fiefs like Eldorn who have caused trouble for the crown. Raoul tells her it's called obedience through poverty, setting an example of how you will be beggared if you oppose them. During the first banquet at Eldorn, Kel is shocked when she sees Raoul's dinner partner is Alana. The lioness tells her to relax. It's the only way they can speak without claims of a good luck spell being placed on Kel. She talks with Kel through the meal and is very informed of her life. She tells Kel once she gets her shield, she wants Kel to teach her how to use a glaive. Kel is glowingly happy at this. Her hero wants her to teach her a skill. Kel's friends come to her tent to watch her feed the griffin at night, and all of them leave after Cleon does. Kel is confused, thinking about how Cleon hasn't tried to get her alone again. During the day, while traversing the camp, Kel overhears Joran at his old tricks. This time it's with the support of 2 older knights, and the subject is Larent. They insult Raoul, the king and queen, and basically everybody Kel is close to. She approaches them and challenges the knight who is speaking to a joust over the dishonor to her knightmaster. Larent is angry that she stepped in, but she explains that she had no choice when she heard her knightmaster being dishonored that way. Later, while she's prepping her gear for the next day, Cleon comes to her. He kisses her again, and she enjoys it this time. They kiss some more and are surprised by Raoul, who dismisses Cleon. He sits with Kel and tells her how relationships can mess up command. He offers to give her the sex talk, and she stops him, horrified. He's relieved and goes on to tell her about the strengths and weaknesses of her opponent the next day. That night, she goes to her mother, and they have a long talk about love and sex. Eileen says that she thinks the way noblemen talk about their daughters is like horse breeders talking about a mare. Kel insists that she doesn't want to have a relationship, but her mother encourages her to take things as they come and that it's okay for her to go to bed with someone she likes. Kel's father comes back and announces his shock at Kel's planned joust, which Kel now has to explain to both of them. The morning of her joust, she's woken by the griffin attacking her. He's learned to fly now. Raoul helps clean her cuts and feed her breakfast. When the joust comes around, Kel unseats her opponent, Ansel, on the second pass. He tries to say that it means nothing, but she demands he follow through on what is required by the laws of chivalry and demands that he recant what he said about Raoul, and also to apologize to Larent with witnesses present. The field herald is amazed that she won on her first joust, and she sees Raoul collecting money from a bet. She cares for Peach Blossom herself, wanting to thank him despite Kasim offering to help. Cleon finds her, and she talks with him about what Raoul said. He agrees that he should have thought of that. He reveals that her friends had been getting into fights over her honor over the years without her knowing. That night, Joran's other knight friend, Volden, sends a challenge to Kel. She refuses, and he comes to find her and slaps her, knowing she can't refuse that challenge. She and Cleon wander off alone to sneak some kissing in, and he leaves her at her tent. Owen comes to ask if he can arm Kel the next day, and she agrees. The griffin is acting strange, flying circles around the tent. The next day it flies to the arena and yells at her during the joust, pulls a dishonorable move, and tries to actually run her through. She defeats him and forces him to yield to her. The queen and a bunch of other ladies take Kel away after the joust. She's healed and sleeps. The next morning she tries to bathe the griffin at the lake, but he freaks out. 2 adult griffins arrive, and so does Dane, to let Kel know that they are the baby's parents. They thank Kel through Dane for caring for their child and give her a gift of a bag of their feathers. She returns to her tent, feeling mixed about them being gone, but knowing that her life will be easier now. As the progress moves on, Kel is challenged a lot. She doesn't always win. One conservative knight that she faces even congratulates her and apologizes for listening to the gossip about her. One night she sees her name on the lists again. This time the challenger is Wilden. He sends Kel flying, but after he comes to give her pointers and ask if Joran is making trouble again. Raoul tells her that Wilden was the last person to best him 10 years prior, and that he stopped jousting against him to maintain his record of wins. They return to the palace for midwinter. The prince and Cleon have their ordeals this year. Kel goes to the chapel again, and this time the chamber gives her a vision of being crippled by a jousting accident and seeing people murdered and being unable to help. The day before Cleon's ordeal, he and Kel spend the day together. She dresses in girls' clothes, and they go out of the way to some spots in the city so that they can hold hands and kiss and spend time together. Raoul is actually joining Kel's brother, Cleon's knightmaster, instructing Cleon in the laws of chivalry before his ordeal. When Raoul returns, they try to keep busy until their friends, including Bury and the prince and his bride-to-be, show up to have a party to distract them all. The next morning, Kel goes to the chapel to wait for Cleon to emerge from the chamber. When he does, she is weak with relief, knowing that the chamber is a hammer on those who enter. They have another party in Raoul's quarters, and Kel and Cleon sneak off to make out a bit. Bury and Raoul spend the evening talking with each other. The next morning, Raoul wakes Kel, telling her that Vincent's ordeal was that morning, and he's asked for an audience with the magistrate, Duke Turamat, present, which means that it's something bad. Everyone, including Raoul's sister Calisin, attends. Vincent comes in, shrinking from a barrage of invisible blows. He desperately confesses to beating and raping 3 commoners the previous year and begs the king to make the chamber stop punishing him. The queen tells him they don't command the chamber, and he's sent off to give his official confession. Kel's upset, thinking that if she'd reported him when he attacked Lalassa, then he wouldn't have hurt those other women. Burry finds her shooting her Yamani longbow in the snow-covered yards and brings her to the rider's mess to warm up. She tells her that the chamber is making Vincent feel every blow he delivered to the women he attacked, and reminds Kel that a law involving attacking commoners is being revised specifically because of her actions. She also tells her that Lalassa closes her shop early a few times a week to teach women in the city to defend themselves, and it's all thanks to Kel. She knows that Kel will still feel guilty, but tells her that no court in the land would punish Vincent the way the chamber is doing now. Kel feels better, but she still feels like she didn't do enough. Burry reminds her that so long as there's class differences, there will be people who abuse the common folk because they can. On her way to her room, she's accosted by Joran again. She defends herself, and he spews more dumb stuff at her about how she's ruining the country. Raoul hosts another party the night of the prince's vigil, and the next morning they observe him leaving the chamber victorious. Kel opens her midwinter presents and finds a new saddle for Hoshi from her benefactor. It matches her saddle for Peach Blossom. The next night, Raoul has to go to dinner at his great-aunt's house, and Kel suggests that he takes Burry with him to avoid the matchmaking talk. He agrees, and so does Burry. The next morning, Kel is woken up by a man barging into her room screaming that she killed his son. Raoul comes through from his room, followed by Burry, clad only in a blanket. Raoul stops the man and the two people with him. It is Joran's father. The ordeal chamber opened on his son's corpse that morning. He accuses Kel of breaking down the chamber's power by poisoning the gods against the realm. Raoul is angrier than Kel has ever seen. He makes the man shut up, threatening that out of respect for his loss, he won't ask for these insults to be answered in combat. The man keeps trying to insult Kel, and Raoul tells him to go bury his son. They leave, and Raoul tells Kel to ignore him. Burry says that Kel may sort of be at fault for what happened to those boys because they showed their true despicable selves when faced with a girl who doesn't fit their mold. Raoul tells Kel that she's done nothing but good for the realm since coming to the palace, including helping an old bachelor like him. Then he goes back to bed with Burry. Garvey faces the chamber that night, and Burry says that he will have an audience to see if he winds up like the other two. Garvey and Zahir pass without incident, though this year Wilden suddenly retires. Kel goes to him to ask him why, and he tells her that it's his fault the boys failed and that one died. She tries to argue, but knows that it's true. He sees the look on her face and tells her that he did everything he could to get rid of her. He encouraged the younger boys to be brutal in their treatment of the younger pages, and that thankfully he listened to his sense of honor and let her stay after she completed her unfair trial period. He says that it was his attitude that allowed people like Joran to flourish. He tells Kel that the greatest thing he did as training master was teach her. He has asked for a post on the Scanran border. Before she leaves, she asks him to consider Owen as a squire, who is still without a knight master. He ponders it for a second and agrees. Kel returns to her room, where later Owen finds her, and he is ecstatic that he is a real squire now to a knight that he respects and will be going to combat with him. The progress begins again, and Raoul and Burry take their commands out ahead of the progress to scout the roads. They approach the Great Desert, and Cleon begins to get jealous when Dom and Kel are talking. They meet with some Bazir tribes and are treated to feasts by them. When they arrive in Persepolis, Kel wakes one morning to find Crown dead on her pillow. She takes her to Dane, who explains that she was 8 years old, which is past a normal wild sparrow's lifespan. She finds Kel's mate Freckle dead a few days later and buries them together under an olive tree. She repeatedly turns down all challenges against her now, despite the insults to her honor that follow. Eventually, as the progress keeps moving, Raoul has to take his company to a disaster relief. Burry and her rider group joins them. They spend a long time helping the refugees and eventually return to the progress. Kel and Cleon get hot and heavy again, and Kel gets herself a pregnancy charm, just in case she decides she wants to take the next step with Cleon. Wilden and Owen arrive, and Kel finally puts her name up to joust again. Of course, Wilden puts his name against hers. She and Cleon finally talk about how he hasn't actually taken her to bed. He has a marriage arranged, and he wants to talk his mother around, not wanting to bed Kel if he can't marry her after, which is the way noble women have to do things. She manages to stay seated during her joust against Wilden, though his blows knock her silly. He shakes her hand after, congratulating her on taking his advice after their last match. He knocks everyone out of the saddle, so the crowd is going wild for her, even though she didn't win. She goes to sleep and wakes to find 3 young girls in her tent. They want to become pages and ask her for advice. She tells them what to work on and also tells them what to expect from the other pages. She hopes to see them again someday as they try for their shields. The progress stops at Fife Mindelan, and Kel gets to see her oldest brother and her nieces and nephews for the first time in years. While stopped there, news comes that the Scanrans are invading. The progress breaks up, and Cleon and some others go to the border. The king and queen leave the progress and discreetly follow with Raoul, Bury, and their commands as guards until the commander of the northern forces comes to send them away for protection. They return to the progress for the last few weeks before it finally ends, returning to Chorus in the fall. None of Kel's friends on the border return from midwinter, and she's worried for them. She goes to the chamber again, and it shows her a vision of Cleon dying in battle. No squires fail this year, and Raoul takes the company out from the palace to look for work to help people. Raoul sets Kel the task of inspecting gear and resupplying the company. She quickly figures out it is because he plans to take them north in the spring. The king, Miles, and Flynn have figured it out too and come to meet with the knight and his squire. Raoul has planned to go regardless of what the king said, and he's shocked when they tell him the commander of the first company of the king's own, who had been sent north instead of Raoul's command, is dead. Raoul is furious. He had told the king that commander wasn't fit for field command, and John had ignored him because he was frustrated with Raoul trying to dodge his responsibilities at court. The king gives them more money for supplies and gives them official orders to go north. Miles says that he has a few spies with the clans following the expanding warlord Magur Rothasak, I think I said that right, and he's holding hostages from each clan to get them working together. There are also reports of strange war machines. The members of the Own call going to war facing the Kraken, because anybody who has faced it will remember it forever. They reach their destination in the north and bolster local defenses. They patrol and scout, taking prisoners from small attacking bands when they can. Kel thinks that this feels more like facing bandits than anything else. She gets overconfident and at one point forgets her helmet and winds up with an arrow grazed to her head. Unfortunately, the Own loses members to these attacks, though those remaining don't question Kel's ability anymore. Finally, a larger assault happens. They do a multi-pronged attack on Northwatch Fortress and send a band out to attack a train of merchants that are heading to the nearby town of Riverwatch. Raoul arrives in time to save most of the merchants and get them behind some cover before the battle begins in earnest. Kel uses her griffin-fletched arrows to take down wave after wave of attacker while posted with Dom's squad. Dom suggests that she tie griffin feathers over her eyes because the enemy is being hidden by a mage. The griffin feathers allow her to see through the mage's illusion, and she kills him, using her griffin-fletched arrows. Though in the ensuing wave, Dom is injured. Raoul gives her command of Dom's squad and goes to take down the giant of the Scanran's side. The soldier Wolsit tries to argue with her orders since she isn't even a member of the Own, and she grabs him and threatens him to get in line. He gives in, and they follow her orders. The Sparrow and Jump begin to panic, and Kel is worried because they're acting more scared than she has ever seen. Instead of more men, a metal creature comes from the trees toward them. It is 7 feet tall and has a deadly tail and knife claws at the end of each limb and a mouthful of razor-sharp metal teeth. It speaks with the voice of a child, calling out for its mother. It kills one of the men, and Kel orders the rest to get ropes around it. At first, she thinks they all fled as she faces the creature alone, but Wolsit appears and drops a rope around its neck, pulling the rope over the side of the rocks around them to try and hold on to the creature, securing its head. Other men come with ropes, one even having Jump help wrap the thing up. Kel grabs its last free hand to stop it cutting itself free, and it slams her against the rock repeatedly. She manages to hold on till it's fully secured, but she can see that it will soon pull loose because it has supernatural strength. The men try to stop her, but she takes out her warhammer, a gift from Raoul, and uses it to climb the thing's body. She shoves a rock in its mouth to stop it biting and uses the armor-piercing side of the hammer to rip its head open. A strange mist escapes from it, crying Mama in that child's voice, and Kel field promotes Wolsit to corporal for his quickness and understanding that its head needed to be secured first. They wrap the thing up and maintain their post in case any further assaults come. That night, relief comes with food for them. The battle is over, the giants taken care of. Raoul takes the report of the men and goggles at the machine. He sends someone to demand Numair Samaline get there immediately. Kel has forgotten that it is the year of her ordeal and is surprised when Raoul comes to her one day telling her to pack. Larence sees her off privately. The two of them now have an understanding. All of Third Company who are staying in the north while Raoul takes Kel for her ordeal turn out to wish her luck. At the palace, Kel receives more tactical instruction from Raoul. Though Bury is south with her rider group, many noble ladies have joined in the morning glaive training, so Kel has a lot of training partners. She advises Shinko on plans for the wedding that spring. Neil and Merrick return for their ordeals too. Duke Turamot, the ancient magistrate, asks Raoul to be the second for Kel's ritual. He will even hold vigil with her to ensure that nobody tries to tamper with the law again like they did for her Squire exams. Neil is to take his ordeal first, and Kel last of the 6 candidates. Kel enlists Yuki to distract Neil the day of his ordeal. They go to town and return just in time for his bath. Kel intuits that Yuki has feelings for Neil and spends the night with her so that they can comfort each other while they worry about him. Neil passes, and Yuki gives him her Shukusen fan as a gift. He wears it at his knighting ceremony. All her yearmates pass their ordeals. The day of Kel's vigil, she dines with her parents. She visits Lalasa and takes her horse and other animals to the forest for a ride. She eats alone and writes a letter to Cleon. She says goodbye to her animals, afraid that she won't see them again, and goes to her ritual bath. Raoul and Turamot instruct her. Then she and the old man settle in for the vigil. Kel thinks that Duty looks a lot like the 80-year-old man enduring the freezing chapel all night to make sure that her vigil is uninterrupted. She meditates all night. She enters the chamber early the next day. It makes her face her fear of heights, where she throws herself from the top of a tree rather than letting the chamber win by bucking her off it. Then it shows her friends dying one by one as she stands frozen, unable to help. She thinks that the chamber is just a bully, and it releases her from her visions. She hears its voice in her head telling her that she will do quite nicely. She sees a stone face on one end of the chamber, and it tells her that this isn't part of the ordeal, just something to remember. It shows her a man commanding the metal war creatures, who are tossing dead children into a pile at his feet. The chamber tells her that this is her task. It will find her, and when it does, she must fix it. The door opens, and the chamber compels her to leave. Everybody turns out for her knighting ceremony. Kel's mother openly weeps. The queen herself presents Kel with her shield, a modified Mindelan crest with a distaff border signifying a lady knight. The first one in over a century. Not even Lady Alana has claimed a shield with the distaff border. While dressing for her celebratory dinner, Alana comes to Kel's room. She gives Kel a new Raven Armory blade and answers the question of who had been giving Kel all of these gifts. She gives an emotional speech about how Kel made her so proud and was an inspiration to everyone because she did it all without magic or the favor of a god. Kel invites her to dinner and names her new sword Griffin. I can never make it through the finale of this book without crying. Even just reading the recap right now, I was getting goosebumps because of it. Of course, the person who gave the gifts was Alana, but the scene where she finally gets to give Kel a present in person is written so beautifully that it is impossible to be unmoved by it. Alana's point about Kel as an inspiration to other girls leads me to one of my biggest praises for this book. Through this story, we see many of the more conservative knights soften toward Kel because of her showing at the tournaments. Most of all, we see Wilden finally openly admitting to her that he had been wrong about her. Most importantly, I think, we don't see him completely change. He softens, but he can't change who he is. Kel's regard for him leads the reader to want what she wants, and she knows that he trained her well and respects him, but he rightly points out that who he is as a person almost made it impossible for her to exist in this world. This breaks through the problem these type of books can have where the good guys are friends with the main character, and with few exceptions are also ideologically aligned with them for the most part. There is a temptation in writing to make a character do a total 180 in their views, to make them on the main character's side or, more of a good guy, and I think it's a credit to Pierce's writing that she resisted that temptation. He remains largely unchanged, but recognizes that he is too stiff to go on as he had been doing, especially training the pages. Kel inspires all the young women of the realm for doing what she did, but she's also helping to create the change that will help those girls thrive by showing people like Wilden the error in their assumptions. It is driven home repeatedly what a slow process this is, and how there will still be people who don't think Kel should be a knight, even if they all fight on the same side. This series has done a better job than any of the others, in my opinion, at showing the vast world and all of its people and intricacies, instead of focusing on the few in the main cast. In Alana's books, we saw a tiny sliver of the sexism she faced, but it was easy to ignore because she wasn't forced to live around it for long. By the time she was outed, she left court. The Bazir mildly resist her at first, but since she quickly takes on the role of shaman because she's a powerful mage, they're forced to largely keep quiet. Her students faced worse treatment than she did for being girls. Kel is out from the beginning and has to withstand the crushing judgment of the patriarchy trying to put her back in a box, and she refuses time and again. This book also does what I was missing in the first two. It gives Kel a larger cast of female friends and just women in general to interact with. I've said this repeatedly at this point, and I will continue to say it. An awesome girl existing in a world of just awesome boys does nothing to even the playing field. It just supports the idea that only a few exceptional women are equal to men. Alana didn't get women who were equal to her and her friends till the fourth book in her series. We even see the fallout of that type of thinking in this book, where people think that Alana was just a fluke. She was an exceptional person favored by the gods, and that all other women aren't equal because Alana is alone existing in a world of men. The Chamber of the Ordeal feels greatly different than it did in Alana's series. In this series, we see it actually punishing wicked people who enter, making me wonder how so many of the small-minded and vicious knights that Kel, and Alana for that matter, faced managed to pass through it. Joran isn't the only person in this book who is wicked. We see adult knights who are just as bad as him, one of whom actually tries to murder Kel in a dishonorable way. So if the chamber really does hammer out the flaws in people and see to their core, how did it allow those men to pass and become knights? At one point, when Burry says the thing about how Kel might actually be in some way responsible for what happened to Vincent and Joran because her presence brought out who they really were, and I just think that's wrong. The thing is, they were always like that. They just hid it. They didn't suddenly become violent bigots who were willing to rape women or bully other people. I take issue with that line from Burry because it honestly feels like blaming the victim, but that's a whole other issue. If the chamber can really see into people's hearts and minds, shouldn't it have done the same to the other men who ran with Joran, keeping them from becoming knights who later tried to hurt Kel and other people like Larent? It's inconsistency that didn't really bug me until this book where we see Joran and his friends get destroyed by the chamber. On the positive side again, we finally get to see characters who make the Amani a little less of the savage outsider characters. I like how the queen immediately takes up hobbies with the Amani ladies, practicing the glaive, learning to use the Shikusen fans, and spending as much time with her future daughter-in-law as she can. By the end of the book, many more of the noble ladies are following the queen's example, further eroding the more conservative beliefs of the country. There is a lot of mention in this book about how it has only been a century since the last Lady Knights existed. I can't help but wonder if the plans for the backdrop of the Becca Cooper series were already in motion at this point, or at least ideas about it kicking around in Pierce's head. Because the shift from women following the warrior tenets of the great goddess to the idea of the gentle mother is a background setting for that series. Keeping the positive stuff rolling, everything about growing up and womanhood in this book is just perfect in my opinion. Kel occasionally mentions things like needing more pads for her monthly cycle or having a weepy moment, and it's all mentioned just super casually. Any type of story centering around cis women tends to ignore that as a thing that they have to deal with. It's not glamorous to write about, and it's often an afterthought, especially for male writers who also seem a little tone-deaf when they do try to include it. That Tamora Pierce makes a point to include it the whole way through is a way to make young people who may be reading the book feel more comfortable talking about their own body changing and understanding the frustrations that come with it. Maybe help them feel less alone in their changes, if they don't have people around them who will talk about it. The sex talks that happen here go above and beyond my wildest dreams. Kel is a little embarrassed by her mother's openness, but feels comfortable going to her when she thinks she may be ready for sex. That is something I wish more kids felt comfortable doing. Sex education is important to kids who need to understand what their bodies are doing and feeling comfortable with your parents to guide you through it. The advocacy for birth control availability and choosing what happens to your own body was also a nice touch. Thinking back, I read this young enough that it probably helped shape my own ideas on bodily autonomy. I'm from the United States, if you couldn't tell from how I talk, where sex education is non-existent in large swaths of this country. Books like this that don't ignore menstruation and sex and deal with them in a respectful and even entertainingly educational way are crucial for kids like I was. This is kind of a little off topic, but a big point that people who don't want women on military front lines make is basically, but what about their periods? They'll get unreliable and emotional and have to carry menstruation products and it will be inconvenient. And seeing that refuted in fiction as a kid helped me when I later joined in those conversations as a cis woman in military service. I can tell you right now that of all the things I dealt with, including extreme sexism and brutal treatment by some of the cis men I served with, my periods were nothing. I'd been living with them half my life at that point. Learning how to deal with them while also being sweaty all the time was nothing. I'd say the only real problem I have with the plot of this book is that it meanders all over the place. The overarching goal is Kel's ordeal, so much of the book feels like filler. Filler isn't a dirty word when used in this context by me. The book spans many years, so obviously a lot is going to have to happen. The backdrop of the story is lining up major conflicts for the next book with the war in Scanra. This is the woman who rides like a man of this series. It seems like all of Pierce's Tortall quartets at this point have one of these books in it. The events in the story are obviously important, but it functions more as a bridge to the next climactic story than anything else. With each series, though, Pierce's bridge books get better and better at keeping me engaged and on the edge of my seat. It kind of reminds me of One Piece. The overarching plot of the entire show is finding One Piece, so anything can really happen, and it's technically in service of that plot. So most of the show is filler, but not exactly in a bad way, because technically it's all working toward the main goal. Not everybody is going to like that kind of storytelling, but that doesn't make it any less valid or entertaining to people who do like it. That's all I've really got for Squire. Next week is Lady Night, and I'm dreading reading it because it honestly makes me cry almost constantly knowing what the main bad guy is doing. If you like this video, please do remember to like the video. It really helps me out. Share this video to your book-loving friends and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm learning more about what engagement on videos does because as my audience grows little by little, I do want to make sure I'm keeping my content consistent with what you guys enjoy. If you'd like to support me on Patreon and get a say in what stories I cover in my one-off episodes and eventually what I will do when I finish Pierce's books, then head over to patreon.com/writingwomen. You can subscribe for as little as $2 a month to suggest things for the polls, $5 a month to vote in the polls, and $10 a month to see a lot of background information on how I do what I've been doing. Thank you to my current diehard patrons, Mariodoc Brandybuck, Miss Psycho, Amy Chu, aka The Doctor, and Bruce. See you next time.